Ready? Welcome to the 14th Step. Special guest again, Judge Vanessa Heinold. Thank you.
The judge.
The judge.
Thank you so much
You're
for
back.
having me.
That's how we'll just refer to you as the judge.
Judge.
I need to, next time I'm gonna bring a gavel for you.
To start it off.
14th Step is now in session. That's right. Okay, so what are we today? We're going to talk about. This is a very interesting topic to me. Decriminalization and legalization. What's the difference? And what's our opinions about it? You know?
It's a good topic to have.
It's a very good topic to have because we talk about recovery and all these different topics about recovery and mental health and the reason people can abuse substances and all this stuff. But you tend to forget when you're in that side of it, talking about all the reasons and the symptoms, there's a whole nother side, and that is the consequences in the legal system. And that's why we have the expert.
Oh, I don't know if I'm the expert.
Oh, you are the expert to talk about this. So let me start off with this question. Do you see there are many countries in the world that are trying different things right now with legalization, decriminalization? Do you see us as a country headed that direction? What do you think? How's it in your years of experience? Where are we going as far as that goes?
Man, good question. So what I can see, just like everyone else, is that in this country, we have certain states that have decided to legalize, for example, marijuana. Mm-hmm. And we have certain states that have decided not to, or have decided to maybe make the penalty for the possession of those drugs, or mostly marijuana, to be less than or lighter than it has been in the past. So I definitely see the trend, right? The trend that's happening now is that there is but there are more and more states that are moving towards this idea of legalization.
Yeah.
We're seeing it with medical need, mm-hmm. right? Medical necessity. We're seeing that kind of more liberally construed in different states. And then, and like I said, the number of states that are legalizing it in just possession is increasing, mm-hmm. Kind of every time there's mm-hmm. a legislative session in those particular states. So, I mean, I would have to say, yes, I think that the country is definitely moving towards that. There are a lot of things that come with that, though. For example, like these businesses, you've got to figure out how to regulate these businesses, mm-hmm. right? And so for the longest time, you couldn't deposit large amounts of cash, right? The banking industry wouldn't accept those kinds of deposits from those types of businesses mm-hmm. selling marijuana, right? So then it became a safety issue for those folks because people knew they had large amounts of cash.
They'd have to hoard it.
Yeah. And so it's a
lot of weird stuff.
It's a bigger issue, right? It's like, okay, we can legalize it, but you've got to also, take the steps to do the other things. Like, how do we make this a legitimate business? How do we regulate this? How do we, and so there,
well,
there's a lot.
I always remember seeing that states could do it, but it was still illegal federally.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like that
marijuana is illegal
sense.
on a federal level.
So they could. It's like the people that would be interviewed on 2020 or whatever they did with these mm-hmm. big farms. They would say, well, we could get raided at any time federally mm-hmm. and get shut down. Mm-hmm. And I always, it never made sense. But let's just talk about just the THC or the marijuana for now, because there's some. So I can't imagine like in the court system. Like what you said, there's got to be such a jumbled gray area when it comes to, there's got to be so many entangled issues. We just mentioned one, but hypothetically, I'll give you one, okay? Let's say somebody takes they're from Texas, they live in Texas, they hypothetically go to Colorado for vacation, and they buy edibles, and they're on vacation, and they do that there. Well, then they come back to Texas, okay? They don't have it. But their job does a drug test, and they test positive, and they go, but I did it in Colorado because I don't know how long does it stay in your system, whatever. But and they get fired or whatever it is, or so I can't imagine. That's got to be weird to have one state over is this way, one state is. Do you see that much? I mean, or is there a lot of weird stuff like that happens?
Yeah, I mean, there's like, bigger implications, right? Yes. And look, we know, right, that we are affected by the states around us, right? Mm-hmm. We know that. We know people travel through Texas. They travel. There are different laws in different states, and we have this, this larger principle, this kind of that you are to be, treated in a similar fashion in these various states, and we can go into the constitutional proposition for that, but. You have to know what's illegal in one state and what's not illegal in another, and things like that. So anyway, yes, to answer your question, yes, there are issues like that arise. Typically, it's going to be handled employer by employer, whether there's a contract in place, what are those HR requirements, how they're going to handle that. But those are some of those bigger implications that I'm talking about when you have different states that hold different ideas about how to treat these substances. And ultimately, here's the deal. Whether it is legalized, decriminalized, or illegal, right? We all know substances, no matter what they are, no matter what their status is, can be abused.
Right.
And so I think, and truly, like what you guys do is so important, right? Is like teaching people, because look, alcohol has been legal for how long?
The companies will have the policies about what you can do and what you can get away with as far as the company policy. But I've seen a real impact, especially when Colorado legalized marijuana for recreational use, which opened up businesses to just sell products. And it's very liberal in what they can sell. They can sell THC, they can sell it 100 different ways. And they can sell it 95% potency, all the way down to whatever. Once they did that, Texas was flooded with professional, products, vape pens and edibles, and these are all mailed from Colorado. I mean, you can just get them in the mail. What I see now, I work with kids on the weekends, and almost every high school kid that I work with vapes, THC pens. Almost all of them do. And I bet that a lot of that stuff comes from out of state. Probably comes from Colorado.
Yeah.
And that is like epidemic level. When you have a THC vape, it's so easy to use. You can have it in your pocket. You can use it at any bathroom that you come across and nobody's going to know. If it's marijuana that you have to smoke, I mean, everyone's going to know that you're smoking it because it's going to the whole building's going to smell. But these kids especially are just vaping constantly all day long. And I think that can have a much different kind of health impact than just smoking marijuana. So I would say I'm pro legalization. Because I'm of the opinion, on a pragmatic level, I don't think that the war on drugs has been effective at curbing drug use. I just don't think it has been. And so I think we need to do something different. But to me, it's a difficult issue because there's always going to be a consequence of when you have a big policy change like that. Like when you legalize something, there's good things that can happen from that, but then there's always a flip side. And right now, I think what we're seeing with the legalization of marijuana is that the number of people that are using THC has gone up.
Yeah.
Because it's also it's not a dangerous drug, but God, these kids are running around school. Like I bet in the high school where I'm kind of working with, I bet half of those kids are high all the time, literally all the time.
And, that's why I feel like, whatever our stance is on legalization or decriminalization or whatever it is, it still is such an important part of what you do every day to ensure that we, as a society, right, are I mean, and like, let's put aside the children. I think that's a whole other issue and problematic as well for kids and their developing brains to be exposed to that, right? Totally. But again, I worry about folks abusing or misusing whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
I think people. Just like there can be someone who doesn't misuse alcohol, I think there can be people who don't misuse marijuana if it's legal, right?
Right.
But I just worry about the folks that do, right? The folks that use whatever the substance is as a coping mechanism, as something that like gets them through the day or gets them. Anyway, that's always my concern.
And that's a huge concern with it, because when you legalize something, you do kind of bring it to the surface. You make it more available. Mm-hmm. A lot of people will not use drugs because of the stigma around doing something that's illegal. Mm-hmm. Some people. But I think if we're talking about like impact on society, as a whole, I think the crime that is involved with drugs there's a big reason for that, is because it's illegal. And so now you have a black market. And I think that the black market for drugs is probably where most of the crime happens. Mm-hmm. I don't think the criminals are necessarily the drug users. I think it's more the people that sell it. Mm-hmm. I mean, cartels, for example, exist selling drugs to Americans. And they sell drugs to us because we buy them. Mm-hmm. So that's where I'm coming from with legalization is more, if you bring it out of the darkness, out of the black market, you kind of start to dry up some of the demand for black market, criminals that sell drugs.
Well, and then the other side of that we've seen in these states that have legalized marijuana is the tremendous amount of money that can be generated for the state to then pour into,
That's the theory, right?
That's the theory.
And
there is a lot of money to be made on taxing and regulating and doing all the different things, right?
I think that's where most of the money comes in, is from, I've watched several specials and these people talk about the amount of money they have to pay to even open a shop, or they
tax it like crazy. I'm sure.
That's where I think when they promise the money's going to go back into the economy some way, I don't think that's happening. Yeah. I think what's happening is the state is getting the taxation from it, and then you're paying this hyper tax when people buy it. But let me ask you this: in Texas, if somebody gets pulled over and they have a certain amount of let's just, obviously you can't have an open container of alcohol, period, okay? Right. But let's say they have some, a vape, one of those vape pens he's talking about, and they have something like that. Decriminalization is when it's still not legal, but you go a little easier on certain things if it's a certain amount or less. Do we do that here in Texas? Is that a county by county thing? Like, who makes the rules on, well, if you get pulled over in Victoria and you have I don't know if you have an ounce of, I'm making up a number, but if you have an ounce of something, well, you're going to get let go with a ticket, but you're not going to get taken in. But if you go do that in Gonzales, they may haul your rear end into Utah. You know what I mean? Is there what's the measuring stick there, or is there one?
Yeah. So this is a great issue and like a really hot topic right now in the criminal justice world in the state of Texas, because right now, for example, it is illegal to possess marijuana at certain percentages of THC, right? So
the strength of it. Okay.
A certain percentage, right? So what happens, somebody has, we'll just say less than 2 ounces, right? Yeah. That would normally be a Class B misdemeanor of possession of marijuana.
Okay.
So they're charged with possession of marijuana. And let's not even name the county right now,
okay.
Right? So what happens then is, they go to court, they say, they could say, I'm not guilty, I want a trial, right? The state of Texas, whoever the prosecutors are, have to prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt. And what they have to prove is it is a percentage of THC that is illegal, right? In order to do that, I mean, they can't look at it and tell. They can't smell it and tell. They can't, none of that. So what they have to do is they have to send that baggie or whatever it comes in, whatever it is, to the DPS crime lab. And the crime lab then runs tests on it to determine what the makeup is of that plant or whatever it is, right? And then that comes back to the prosecutor's office, and then they can go forward on that case. Well, that takes money because it costs to run that test, and it takes time. Okay, and sometimes the crime lab can get back to you within 4 months. Sometimes it is a lot longer than that because this isn't the only case they're testing, right? They've got to test like the meth that was just sent, the cocaine that was just sent. They've got to test the Xanax that was just sent. They've got to set all over the state. Okay, so that costs time. It's a time tax, and it's costs money to get that back. So here's what's happened here in the state of Texas, and is my understanding, talking to folks around the state, is it really has become more of a county by county decision, right? The district attorneys in those counties decide, do we want to spend our resources testing the marijuana, right? Do we want to spend the time waiting for those test results? And so that's now become part of the decision-making process.
Wow.
And you think about in a large metropolitan area, right? How much we're talking about.
That's right.
And so those are the things.
And how
that
much
weigh
of a
in.
priority is that as far as law enforcement goes?
Right.
And some places they're like, we want to focus on more dangerous things.
Yeah, more dangerous drugs, right? Yeah, so that's kind of the state of affairs. The other thing I should say is that district attorneys in various counties have their thumb on the pulse of the constituents, right? Ideally, it's
elected office.
That's right. And so in certain jurisdictions, they kind of know. Like if we go to trial, we pick a jury of 6 jurors and a Class B misdemeanor, and we present this case to them. We can show them that this is the right percentage that constitutes an illegal possession of marijuana. And they know whether or not those juries are going to be like, maybe the juries say, okay, yeah, guilty. But in some of these metropolitan areas, what they're finding is juries are not bothered by less than 2 ounces of marijuana.
Right.
So if they do come back guilty, then they go to a punishment. The punishment is not there. Or they come back and say, not guilty. And so
all that time and
the resources, right? The resources of doing this.
Right.
And so that has to be weighed because every district attorney in the state of Texas have a budget. They have to make decisions, prioritize where they spend their money and where they don't, right? And so some have, have taken a different, and in large part, rural areas maybe take a little harsher position on it. And I say harsh, they may be willing to spend the money and do that. And some places aren't.
Man. It's really interesting it's an interesting example of how a cultural shift in public attitude about marijuana kind of like naturally pushes against a law enforcement and kind of creates a environment where law enforcement starts to focus less on it because it's so prolific.
Well, I can also see though, as the years go by, if the cultural shift happens, well, then the younger generation that then goes into law enforcement is going to have a completely different attitude than the generation
and they may
before
vote
them.
differently and may want to vote in people who are more lenient anyway.
Right, and or even the prosecutors may have a different attitude about it, and that especially in more, and I say this in the nicest way I can say it, but you go to like when you're describing a metropolitan.
Well, those
area,
are typically more liberal than
Austin.
Yeah,
they're probably not going to prosecute certain things like that. I would think.
Forever.
Yeah.
and there's also different ways to handle it, right? Like maybe it's not about going to court and entering a plea of guilty or not guilty. Maybe it's a pretrial diversion that happens.
Yeah, you're talking, yes.
Maybe there's an education opportunity that happens. Maybe there's, special expense fees that are paid and then you complete, So there are other ways to handle it without, going to court, getting a conviction, getting a punishment, things like that.
Right.
That might actually be a little more beneficial.
Yeah.
Right. Now, the other thing to think about is I'm talking about less than 2 ounces, which is a Class B misdemeanor, right? Now, we also have those cases where we've got someone pulled over and they have 12 pounds of marijuana.
Yeah. That's a different story.
People typically have a more a different opinion of that, right?
Right.
And so, that's another thing to consider, right? So when it's personal
maybe it's
possession,
distribution versus somebody. It's odd.
it's
They got
exactly
scales and whatever. Or whatever it is, right? They're obviously going to sell it. That's a whole different animal.
Yeah, it is. And you know what? Juries feel differently
They
about
do.
that. And district attorneys feel differently about that.
Yeah.
And, so, that's the other side of it.
Well,
I'm not giving y'all any answers.
No,
I'm
you
just
are.
presenting
No,
your-
that's very interesting.
Yeah.
But like, let's. In the decriminalization part of it, there's countries like parts in Canada, parts in Europe that are. I'll just use the one that I did a little bit of research on. Is they're allowing a certain amount of any drug to be in somebody's possession, and they won't get a ticket or they won't get taken in. Whatever that, it's typically like a daily use dose, but I'm talking hard drugs. Okay.
What do you think about that?
Well, this is what's interesting to me, and it makes me just go, that they'll let those people go, but they will still, if you sell it, it's highly illegal. But to me, and that makes perfectly good sense to me, but I'm like, where do you think those people are getting it from? They still got it from the person that's selling it, and they're going to get it tomorrow from the person that's selling it. So you're not eliminating any of that. I think what Mark said about the war on drugs and all this we've seen a whole set of issues and problems, okay? Shifting that over to less penalties and less prosecution on it is going to just change the set of problems.
If that's all you do. Yeah.
If that's all you do.
Yeah.
What I think is important to talk about is that those extra things that you were talking about. I think it's from when I've talked to people that are in trying to go into recovery and stuff, they tend to be the law enforcement is the enemy, or it's us against them, and it's this very antagonistic
it's a
relationship.
War. They call it a war. So
okay, I'm a little slow. I didn't pick up on that. Yes.
So I mean,
yes, it's this and this, and that's why like the court to recovery program we're doing here in Victoria,
it's wonderful.
And it needs to be more like everybody's on the same team trying to help in some way, and we're all pulling on the same end of the rope, not somebody feeling like they're out to get me all the time. They need to think, well, man, the law enforcement they got a bunch of ways they're trying to help me, not hurt me. And right now, for a long time, it's been like they're trying to hurt me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't like. I think the decriminalization stuff. If you just decriminalize it and you don't do anything else, you're going to keep people out of jail, which is okay. I mean, that's fine or whatever. But you don't solve any of the other problems because they're still buying it from drug dealers. So you still have a black market. And to me, that's really the big issue. People are dying of overdoses because of a black market because it's completely unregulated. There's no way to. I mean, you can't regulate it. To me, if you're going to go for decriminalization, I think you need to go for like more of a harm reduction side of it. And this is
controversial too, right?
Oh yeah,
it's so. I don't know how I feel about it. I don't know if I'm really on one side or the other when it comes to this. But for example, there are places that will offer clean needles to people. They'll let them go into their little place and they'll let them they'll give them resources to get connected to treatment if they need treatment, that kind of stuff. But that also creates a whole area around it of just like, people on the street using drugs all the time. It's a complicated thing.
It is complicated.
Or you just make the jails house all those people, and then they come out the next day because...
One of the examples that I read about was a place in Canada that legalized it, and where you could buy anything up to a certain amount, but they were going to pour tons of money into helping people with rehabilitation and all these other things. Except guess what happened?
Yeah, I know.
The money for that didn't come in for about 3 years.
It sounds nice.
It took forever. So all they did was flooded the streets with all kind of drugs that you could get, and then didn't have any of those resources for a long time. So that it's all going to be grants and man, it's muddy.
It is because if you go to the most radical side of legalization, you set up stores that sell drugs. They're like liquor stores, but they sell meth and they sell crack and that's what they sell. And you have a regulated product that's not adulterated. You have, maybe you have people that can go and help addicts, and they're not getting so that's kind of the most radical side of legalization, where you actually have a legal market for selling hard drugs. To me, maybe it dries up the cartels, maybe it doesn't. In California, there's still a black market for marijuana.
Even bigger, because remember the video we watched and we talked about?
And weed stores in California are on every block. They're everywhere. And
it
there's still a black
hasn't slowed
market.
down the black market at all. In fact, what it did is make their product better, is what the report showed. Because all the legalization made the product stronger and more pure, so the black markets
met that demand.
And now they're every
because it's
public
cheaper
land.
They make it so expensive on the legal market
because of the taxes and stuff.
So then that creates a demand for cheaper stuff. So now you have a black market again. So it's really a complicated thing.
It is a very complicated thing.
What it makes me realize is I don't want to be a judge. That's what it makes me realize.
Let's just cane people again.
That's what we talked about. Corporal punishment in the public square at the gazebo.
Ultimately, for me, I end up seeing the people, and you guys know this, but I end up seeing people that are, really struggling with their usage, right?
Right.
And that's what that's what I worry about. That's why I'm like, how do I help these folks? We've got to get them in touch with the right people and get them the help that they need, and get them some information about what it is they're doing to their body.
Yeah.
And
there's a heart behind that, and you obviously have that heart that you're looking at this from a standpoint of that you want to help them, and you have a heart to help them. And I think if everybody has that attitude, then we're on the positive side of making a difference. And that's a good thing. That's exciting, and that's why we enjoy having you on here, because that I know you want to help people, and that's all we can do, right? Yeah. The little bit we can to try to make a difference.
That's the hope that I have. I think the issue is becoming less politicized.